Welcome back for video 2.2, where we're going to add a background to our game. So instead of just a plain black stage, we will then have some kind of starscape to be the background for our Asteroids game. And so this video is also going to show you how to load in new textures and then provide a discussion of the difference between textures and materials. So let's start by importing a new texture. So you should have downloaded from online a set of 5 different backgrounds that we could use. And so these are a variety of different file types. Well, actually, these are all PNGs. But Unity can load a variety of file types. It can handle JPEGs, bitmaps, PNGs. And I actually believe it can load Photoshop files natively as well. But these are PNGs, so shouldn't affect anything too terribly much. So to actually load these into our project is very simple. We can drag and drop our PNG file from my view directly into my project. I want these to land inside the textures folder, so you can see that I'm hovering over textures before I release the mouse. Once I release the mouse, I can see that these have loaded into Unity. So like, don't immediately release the mouse when you first drag it in there. So like when I bring this over, notice that Unity takes a second to realize what I'm doing. And then once I can make sure that it's over the textures and textures is highlighted, not like a line like this, but over the textures thing, and it will load them in. So once you've done that, what that actually does is load them as a possible texture for you to use for different things. Now, these, once you've loaded them in, I don't believe there's any changes we really need to make to these. Usually the Unity engine will do a good job of letting us know if some of these settings are not correct, but these should be fine. So let's start trying to turn this into a material. So one of the ways to make the material is to let Unity do that for you. And so let's drop in a background that we can assign this to. So if we go to Game Object, 3D Object, and then I want to either insert a plane or a quad. They both should achieve the job. Let's try a plane first. And so it inserts this flat, essentially two-dimensional object. If we go look at it, you can see it's actually not visible from the bottom side, that the plane only can be seen from the top, and that it is flat. It's two-dimensional. But we're going to use this for our background. So reset its transform and drop it down to a negative Y value of 10 so that it's down below. Now, when we play, we won't notice that it's negative 10 because of how orthographic camera works. And so it'll look like a background. Let's stretch it out so that it actually will fit the size of the screen a little bit more appropriately than what we have here. So the plane is currently 1:1 scale. So let's try to adjust it to be, what would work? I guess let's try an X of 10 and a Y of 20. Oops. The Y is actually not what we want to adjust. We want to adjust the Z. Oh, that may be too big. And actually, I think that's the wrong proportionality. So we want to do like an X of, let's go 16 and 9 to mimic the aspect ratio of my camera. So I guess if we click on the camera, we can also see what it would see. It's not going to view a whole bunch of this, it appears to be. So we may have made the plane slightly too large. So I'm going to shrink the plane down a little bit. Let's try 8 by 4.5 and compare that to the plane. So that's still covering pretty much everything here. But let's build the texture on it and see how that ends up looking. So we can take our space background, and if I drag and drop it onto the thing inside the world, it should automatically attempt to texture it. And it looks like it did. And we can see kind of how comically bad it looks right now because the light is reflecting off of it. And so it looks just kind of like a plastic card floating there, serving as the background. But again, it still might be too large, so I still may even need to think about shrinking this down some more. And that's almost the size we want. So let's go for like 5 and 2.4. And that looks reasonably good. Except for we've got the issue of the light shimmering up here, and we can even see the shadow of the player down here. So what we need to do is modify how this texture works. So it auto-generated a material into the materials folder called background blue space, because that was the name of the file. And it's serving as a standard shader, but that's actually not what we want. We want to switch it to, so click on this, we want to switch it to an unlit type of shader, and it is a texture. And so by doing that, it now no longer reflects light or shadows, and so it's an unlit texture. It's exactly what that bitmap or PNG has as graphic data, and it will show up just completely plain on here. Now, this does look a little pixelated because we're essentially taking a small resolution image and applying it to essentially a 2K resolution. So there is some pixelation, but we could go and look to try to find better graphics for it. But in the meantime, this will serve as a pretty good background for the gameplay of Asteroids. And so if we wanted to make another material for this, let's look at the other way we can make a material. So I still have that other texture that I have down here, this bright star space, which is more starry. We can make our own manual material by right-clicking on the materials folder and going to create, and notice the big list of different assets that we can create. But what we want to create is a material, and it will let you rename it. So it's currently called new material, so I'm going to call it BG_stars, and then push enter. And so now we have another material we can assign to things. So I can drag and drop it onto here, and you can see that it will switch the material that's on that plane. But this one, I actually want it to be a different graphic. So let's switch it from a standard shader to an unlit texture. And you'll see that unlike a shader, it gives me the choice of what texture to use. So I could drag and drop the star space into that texture field because that counts as a texture, and that would be one way to select it. Or if you click the select button, it'll pull up a list of all the valid graphic files you could choose to be your texture. Now, some of these other weird looking ones are like normal maps, which are going to be used automatically on the asteroids to make it look more three-dimensional. But we don't have any normal maps for the background. And so now that we have this other background created, the background stars, I could just as easily switch the background to be that instead. And so I can have this as a separate background to play on. So you could choose between as many backgrounds as you want, and actually you could, with code, switch your backgrounds if you wanted to kind of create a concept of level progression if we didn't want to switch levels. And so I think I'll keep this one. I'll keep the stars. It's relatively simple. It's not very distracting for gameplay purposes, and that should look good. You can adjust the tiling. If you set this to 2, what that does, and it looks painfully bad, but what that tells it to do is to try to repeat this texture twice onto this surface. And so you can kind of see the points at which it's repeating. I think it might be more obvious if this was the other space. you can really see that it's repeating twice in both directions here. So that's kind of not really what you want to play with unless you're trying to do like a grass texture. But for what we're creating here, these textures aren't really designed to be tileable, so they're not going to look good. So you could always Google search tileable star textures, and you might find things that allow you to tile it so it looks natural when repeated like 10 times by 8 times. But right now we're just using what's considered to be a full screen background. In later videos, I'll explore possibly using a skybox as a background instead of just purely this flat, plain panel that we have right now. But that should function for what we're trying to do. Notice though that this does not have a rigid body, and that's because we don't want this to be affected by gravity. And actually this mesh collider is a little excessive. We don't need it. Otherwise, things could collide into this background screen and bounce off of the background. So we could either disable it or even delete it if we wanted to, because we don't need the collider for this background. Nothing's supposed to hit the background and bounce off of it. That would be rather silly. And so we'll end this video here, and that's how we can insert a background into our game so that now we have a starscape in the background to play against. And next up, we're going to look at doing some lighting effects on the ship as it moves so that we can get a particle trail as the ship flies around. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to adding some new features in the next video.